So this conversation is not about technical. Many of my colleagues and partners and our customers have done wonderful technical presentations here. This session is about when you go back, how do I sell and how do I get the budget for what I'm doing? So when I go, and I've done this session in Cisco Live and a few times in other places as well, the question is, who wants to talk about automation? Who wants to take it to its managers? Who knows how to sell it? And I'm going to say a few things which should be more or less common sense, and I'm going to help all to build the story around that. But I think the whole structure helps. And this is relevant for either new customers, and I know some of those around here haven't really deployed NSO yet, and they are still in a more evaluation phase. Some others already have mature solutions, but the discussion about what am I doing, what is the business return for me, it becomes pretty relevant as well, and it's something that is revisited often. So the first thing, a bit of an agenda. The first thing, and this conversation always should start by the need, right? Let's keep in mind, why are we doing this? I would say everybody in the room would have eaten some of those boxes there. Some customers would eat almost all boxes, some of those would eat less. But these were the drivers all across the industry, no matter if you are a service provider, if you're enterprise, or what we are. So things around, I put this around the complexity factor. So everybody knows we have more technology. Service providers are particularly concerned about the 5G at the moment. Everything around the enterprise segment, data center automation and things in that realm. You get more technology on board, you require more scale. And I don't know many customers which are not complaining about the skill shortage these days. Second factor, time to market and differentiated solutions. And also, in the last year in particular, all across the boards, I've been having a big concern around security. So automations would force you to standardize the configurations and the process on the network. Automation will avoid you having things you don't expect and you want to find them. Security has been a key driver in the discussions I've been having lately. Last point. Obviously, if you're doing this, you need to have a business case, and you're going to talk about it in a few minutes. There is one that I call out, which needs to be a bit harder to calculate, which is what is the impact it might have in your organization when somebody does a failure and that results in a catastrophic problem, and I've seen some of those cases. The last topic, it's one that might not be so obvious, but if I ask you, what is the cost of every service you are providing, or a specific service you're providing to end customers, service providers for example, do you know how much it costs? Really? So every time you're providing a layer 3 VPN, do you really know how much it costs these days? Some customers I've seen giving good answers. Some of those I've seen giving answers, they don't really trust it. I would think in the majority, people don't have a good answer for this. So between everything I need to do, all the physical resources, all the human resources, everything I need to spend, between designing and providing the service, I don't know how much it's costing me now. Right? So there are some more numbers on the industry. I guess the automation side is pretty clear on that. I'll be happy to share the documentation with you afterwards. But automation moving forward, there's a few quite critical features we want to achieve. Full service lifecycle management, model driven. One of the really wonderful things about NSO is that we're doing models which work across different kinds of architectures, different devices. I got a lot of questions about, why should I select this platform versus the other? Because we can work a model across the whole portfolio of what you do. Things around, I would call out, this is a software business. I think everybody understands this pretty clearly now. Rich sets of APIs, integrations, unified network CLI. All of this you've been hearing frequently across these days, and I hope you have excellent ideas going backwards. But automation, I like this Gartner quote, IT operations leaders should avoid ad hoc automation implementations that represent expensive mistakes. Instead, follow a systematic approach that maximizes automation benefits. But this is what I'm going to be talking next. First thing, every good vendor, and you should challenge your vendors to say, automation comes with the cost. You understand that you start in this space, you need to have software skills. You need to have a CI/CD environment. You need to have integration costs which you're not seeing before. This is a cost. Be clear on that. But you're going to have a lot of maximization of the benefits, like things around mean time to resolution of problems, troubleshooting, how efficient can I deploy services, what are methods of operation procedures, truck rolls, everything like that. So where is the benefit? Where do I trade one versus the other? The first main idea, which I would like to pass on this session, is when you talk about NSO use cases, they should be tied with business outcomes. And what I mean by this, I've had discussions with customers where I go, so what do you want to automate? And somebody will tell me, I have these guys running these scripts to do BGP updates. What is the business outcome on that? How do you measure how much are you spending there? I get guys asking, I want to update something on the load balancer. No. The way to do this is a use case is something that your organization is providing as a service to someone else. Because that is the budget driver. That is where the money is coming to your organization. And you should challenge your vendor and us, I want to automate the whole business outcome. And that would mean, like, typical service provider example, I'm providing some kind of layer 2 or layer 3 VPN services. I want automated end-to-end. And one important consequence of this is it's not just the act of configuring a device. It's not just the act of putting the CLI output into a device. The majority of the cost, I'm going to evolve into this a bit next, is what is done before that moment and what is done after that moment. So typically somebody creates a ticket, that ticket is validated by someone else, then somebody else assigns resources to that service, like IP addresses, VLANs, then somebody goes into the security rules and verify that's compliant. Somebody checks the configuration again before putting on the network. All of those steps we can automate with NSO and some of the attached products around this ecosystem, and that will maximize the value of automation. If I'm just focusing on the specific act of configuring a network device, the only savings I'm going to get here is the guy who actually on the maintenance window did that step. But everything else still stays the same, and even afterwards, everything else still stays the same. So there's a simple idea which is quite important. The next idea is, okay, so I know I need to do use cases. So what I want to achieve with them. So not far away, I got a customer asking me, okay, I've spent a lot of money on this and I don't really perceive what is the outcome I'm getting. First question I would always make, how are you measuring it? Most of the times when I ask, how are you measuring it? There's not really a good answer or an answer at all. So something which again sounds pretty sensible is define out use cases and then define KPIs for those. And there is a reason to ask for this, because then you can really make the business case of how much you have improved. And one of the wonderful things about NSO and the technology we built here is that if we come to our teams right early in the process and says, good, I want to measure this and that, we can make sure that is logged and available for your systems. While if you do it later on, it's not. Most of the cases, this information is not there. So, again, few sensible, typical things. A KPI should be smart, meaning measurable, signable, realistic, time related, and should be something that matches your organizations, right? So what is an example of that? I'm going to give you something which is true, coming from a customer. Now, I would call out a couple of things on this slide. One is there's several of the KPIs there which are not associated with the act of configuring a network equipment. It's about what happened before. It's about the verifications and all the steps in the flow. This is quite important. If I want to measure all of that, that's where I'm going to get the bigger value. If I'm just saving the part of configuring the device, I'm probably saving 30 minutes for a specific maintenance window. If I'm probably saving everything which is done before and after, I'm going to save many hours. This is an important upsell when you want to push this to your organization upwards. This is an important upsell when you have the business leaders calling out. Okay? So, define use cases, define KPIs. What happens next? Something which also sounds common sense, but not done that often. Let's fund it, right? let's plan it and let's maximize early wins. Again, let's not start an automation project where you're only planning to see benefits in 1 or 2 years from now. That's actually a dangerous place to be. Even if it eventually might happen by one or other reason, that's not what you want. And typically, use case should be something developed within 2 to 4 months, given that our experience in CX. Let's plan to make sure we address the things that probably be the bigger benefit first. If I have done that analysis before, and I know what are my use cases, and I know where my KPIs are telling me I'm going to spend a lot of time, then I can plan properly. Next stage. So the biggest part of the business case, when you elaborate on this, is going to be done obviously on Opex savings, right? Some of those things would be a bit harder to quantify, and we often can have a discussion about this. Opex savings comes in 5 factors, okay? If you make the business case, calculate all of those 5. So let's say that you are provisioning a circuit. It's about the first time you create this service. It's about when you modify this service. It's about when you delete this service. And if you never delete services from the network, which is often happening in service providers, then you have a cost in pretty much the load on your devices, which will affect on your hardware costs. Then you have a cost for term in troubleshooting, and you have a cost in maintenance. All of those costs make part of the business case, right? The reason why those bars would have a different size is, typically change requests. The service is created once. That will be probably consuming a bigger amount of time. Modifications consume a smaller amount of time, but would happen much more frequently. So those make a relevant step on the business case in how you build this. Now, the next stage is, so I know ideas, I know use cases, I know KPIs, I know you have main components, but then I need to drill this down, right? Again, I will hit one idea as I was mentioning before. The fact of doing just the network configuration, it's a smaller percentage of everything involved in all of those steps. Typically, for our experience, where you get the bigger values is things around config validation. We know NSO is pretty wonderful doing this. Big savings. Things around service provisioning, everything which comes from the workflow, right? So to do the business case here, and for the interest of time, I have to kind of condense the presentation. The one I've done in Cisco Live will be 1 hour and a half, and I'm happy to have a conversation afterwards if you want. You pretty much would do, for each of those components I was mentioning, you'd break down the tree in all the components, right? So every time I'm creating a service, every time I'm modifying the service, every time I'm deleting the service, so everything what happens in between. Now, then I got some customers also asking me, well, but can you tell me what is happening here, or because I don't really know. Well, we need to spend time with your operations, or you need to spend time with your operations. Just this session, I got some of the customers telling me, well, we're trying to get those numbers, but it's been a bit a hard fight between us, because you're not telling back Department X, not telling Department Z. But this is a relevant part of it, and that's how you build it, right? So, eventually, OPEX reduction will come in this form. In the end, we should be wrapping this to some kind of big metric summary, right? Everything we've done on the business case, cost savings, time savings, man-hour savings. And this is getting a bit of a better shape in how we bring it upwards to your management, right? This is the bigger part of how you build the business case. OPEX savings, automation is a relevant part of it. Still, there's a couple of other things which tend to be quite relevant as well, and they should be mentioned. MBA kind of guys or people who've been on this, revenue uplift. There's a fundamental concept. If you're providing a better service, you're going to probably getting something on your revenue, right? So one thing, the 10% backlog revenue uplift, it's typically things around unrecognized revenue, which can be improved significantly. You have a proper operation model for how you're providing the services, right? And everybody has some form of this. Even we, Cisco, don't tell anyone we have some form of this with which we have struggled to recognize where the revenue is associated with what, right? Churn revenue uplift. That is pretty much about when you're not providing a good service to your customer, and your customer eventually might drop in your revenue. Efficiency.
So I have a particular story I would recall of a specific service provider which wanted to bring automation differentiation form in reconnecting an old customer and bring it back. If they had an automatic way to do that, will probably take us around 1 or 2 months ahead in time. Because when you decommission the service, you do it in a way that you just need to pretty much connect the cables back to bring it on. That potentially would accelerate your revenue, by the way. If I get revenue 1 month earlier, if I have an automatic process of decommission customers, that can bring it on. So, next stage. This also tends to be a bit harder to quantify. So truck rolls is normally when I have incidents about creating the service. This becomes actually pretty relevant when doing automation with virtualization. So one of the advantages when you are virtualizing firewalls, CPEs, load balancers, etc., is the fact that there are no more so many people connecting cables. You probably have less chances of having problems. Third-party fees. If you have everything physical, you're going to pay a lot of parties with a lot of third-party consequences. Subscriber acquisition costs. If you're making a good job, your subscriber acquisition costs are lower. Calculating these later stages, it's a bit challenging, but it can be done as well. So normally, how we would do this is you pretty much would have a bigger part of the business case around the Opex savings, and then everything else comes as a plus. Now, something else I will tell you is myself as a vendor or anyone from Cisco or external should not come to you and say directly, you have a big dollar value or a dollar value of this size. What we should tell you is your operational efficiency will improve in this form potentially. Because by the way, making those calculations has to be very specific from customer to customer by experience. It depends on how your cost fixed are calculated, your variable costs are allocated, etc. But the message would be is, if I do automation, potentially operational efficiency is going to increase by X. Incident resolution is going to reduce by X. Backlog is going to reduce by X. Okay? And any good organization, I'm sure you can do this, can eventually put a dollar value in that. In the end, one simple slide to use in one meeting would be something like this. So my organization now improves in 20K transactions per year. I save X amount of man hours. My software development lifecycle has improved by 95%. Efficiency network operations has increased by this. Okay? And we have some examples. Our good friends from Telefonica, they presented the first time this in Cisco Live 1.5 years ago. These are true numbers from them. They measure that. This slide has been reused and used often, and it's quite an impressive. So I would call this out. Those were their KPIs. When we started the project, they measured those. And then during the project, we make sure we evaluated how they evolve. Again, if I want to take you something out of this presentation, define the use cases, define the KPIs at the beginning, prioritize and plan where you want to go. Also, I want to call it out something specifically. Automation, again, a bit of an obvious thing, would be of bigger advantage, larger the scale. So whenever we have projects around migrations, which can be either a network refresh, which can be a transition from one vendor to the other, which can be an upgrade of platforms, the automation costs often even pay the whole deployment per se, right? So this is I cannot disclose the name, but this is a true example from a service provider. And again, we measure those KPIs at the beginning, how many minutes each would take. And one thing I would call out is, the customer decided, okay, I'm not comfortable in automating every step. I want to keep doing the post checks manually. Because it's the first time I'm doing it. Fine, we keep it. But if eventually we had automated the post checks part, we probably could have taken this to around 15-16 minutes, right? Which would be an even bigger gain. So in this project, which involved many hundreds, a few thousands of devices, effectively they mean that in every maintenance window, they could do much more, right? And the maintenance windows could be faster. This brings you a really big dollar value when you're putting this on. So, this is a summary of, I think I went a bit fast, Nicholas, but everybody is looking for lunch as well. So this is, like I say, the dollar slide on this part, right? all these conclusions and if you take that aside organization, everything this guy said in the end would be something around this. So when you talk about automation, you go back to your leaders. Remember when I bring you a slide, costs, benefits? Everybody here talks really well things about costs, building the CI/CD setup. What kind of skills I need to have? I'm going to need to have guys who know how to create models. I'm going to need to have guys who understand software development. I need to have guys who understand software testing. I'm going to need to build these teams, and I'm going to need to have this environment. Make sure you understand that. You know? And the reason do you need to understand this, bullet point in the end, automation is not a destination, but this is continuous. I've never seen a case of a customer, I don't think anyone has, they go, okay, I'm automating something again, so I'm not going to touch this again. No, the services will evolve as time goes by. Once you start this journey, pretty much is, you expand what can I do and what is going to be the footprint in my organization. We often start by something very small and you become very massive kind of projects. So you're not going to go one in, one out. So you're going to need to add those software tools and processes, and either you're going to have it by yourselves, or we're going to have it with you, or we have shared models. That's another kind of discussion, but understand that. Second part, establish a framework for planning your organization governance. Now, probably many of you know this, but one of the major sources of troubles when we're delivering these projects tends to be organization conflicts. So automation, if you define a use case as something end-to-end as a business outcome, typically within the IT department of the customer would have many stakeholders. And all of them end to agree. It's important to have that clear from the beginning. And it's important to have somebody which can support that kind of decision making, right? So otherwise you're going to be stuck somewhere in the decision, making a decision. So identify your process, go in the use cases, prioritize early returns. Things which are repetitive tasks are the ones that bring a bigger value first and easier. Something which is very obvious, but again, I need to repeat it almost every time. Automation should have a prerequisite standardization. It does not make sense that if we go and start coding a service into NSO, if that service is way too much diversity on the network. Eventually you can do that, but that will make your project longer and more costly. Nowadays, in most of the projects we do in Europe, we start a bit of a consulting exercise on how the network services are rolled out and what can we do in terms of making them consistent, right? This will make everything much more efficient later on. And, plan your early wins, breaking small deliveries. Don't jump in a project to your stakeholders saying it's going to be taking 2 years until you see something. You should be able to see something consecutively. And make sure you're measuring all of those KPIs. I think with this, I will end up my presentation for now. Any Q's and A's? Happy to answer.
Here up there. Thanks so much for sharing the data. That's useful. Can you go back two slides? Maybe I missed, but in the pre-check, the time is increased from 5 minutes to 7 minutes. So could you elaborate why it was increased?
That's pretty much because we increased the amount of pre-checks we wanted to do. So we start again going on the paper and defining everything what makes sense doing now. We eventually become a bigger set of pre-checks in advance. So that will be a quality improvement, not a time improvement.
Okay. I think they usually, the projection, in difference by automating stuff. But I think I understand this. The only the case for this customer. I think.
Yeah. No. And again, part of the thing is the KPIs and the use cases. You should be industry standardized to a certain extent, but it always gets specific to what you were doing. And that's why, spend some time getting your KPIs, but make sure you have them when you start the project. Okay, that's one of the really important messages I want to bring up.
Okay. Thank you.
Any more questions? I think everybody's hungry.
Thank you so much. Enjoy the salads and the lunch.
Thank you, Joao.
Cisco, the bridge to possible.